Good afternoon once more, colleagues, and thank you for joining us. My name is Edna Kowenje from the Africa Research and Impact Network, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on the Global Goal on Adaptation Indicators in the context of Africa. Before we begin, I'd just like to set a few house rules, and then we proceed. So today's session, as you can see, is being hosted in a webinar format. This means that only the panelists will be able to open their microphones and their videos. Our participants are also able to interact as the session goes via the chat section and the Q&A session. Additionally, this session is being translated. So we have English, the session is running in English with simultaneous French translation. So for you to listen in a language that you're comfortable with, there is a globe button at the bottom of your screen where you will be able to choose the language that you want to listen into. I encourage all of us to interact, share with us where you're joining us from. If you have questions, please use the Q&A part, and our panelists will be able to address them as the session goes. Without much, I'd like to welcome Dr. Humphrey Agevi, who is going to take us through the program, and also to welcome our speakers. Thank you so much for joining us, and please stay active. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edna. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I want to welcome each one of you to today's webinar, being the second pre-COP30 webinar series that is being hosted by the Africa Research and Impact Network, together with other partners, including the Africa Adaptation Initiative, CDKN, IDRC, among others. Today's webinar, we are going to look at we shall have 4 sessions. That is, the first session will be looking at welcome remarks from Dr. Johannes Atela, who will give the emerging insights from the previous pre-COP webinar. And from there, we shall have a keynote speech from Kulthum Omari, who will give a presentation on the SOA process. And then from there, we shall move to the second session that will be looking at the relevance of emerging GGA indicators, bearing in mind that the GGA looked at the thematic sectors. And in today's webinar series, we shall be looking at water, food and agriculture, poverty and livelihoods, and then cultural heritage as key thematic sectors. And then we shall also be looking at the cross-cutting sectors. And then from there, we shall also be looking at some of the country case study challenges and opportunities. And then once we are through with that, then we shall go to the last session where we shall be inviting questions, insights, just from the experiences we have gone through in the case studies that we shall be receiving. That is from Kenya, also from Senegal, and also Mozambique as case studies. Without much ado, I want to take this opportunity to invite Dr. Johannes Atela, who will give welcome remarks and also some emerging insights from the from the previous pre-COP webinar series that was held some time back. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Johannes Atela.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much, Edna. Thank you so much, Dr. Gevi, for the welcome. And thank you so much to all our participants who have joined this conversation today. We value your time and your presence in this webinar. As Humphrey has said, my name is Johannes Atela. I am the director of the Africa Research and Impact Network. Before I give you a bit of a synopsis of what we really want to see or expect in this webinar, I want just to highlight a bit about what ARIN is and what we do. So the Africa Research and Impact Network is a network of researchers from across 36 African countries. So we are bringing together over 200 researchers from these 36 African countries. 30% of these researchers are actually policy makers. So the idea is really to collaborate and support the process of evidence consolidation across different African contexts, working with policymakers and walking the journey through in a way that then transform the ways in which our evidence informs policies. The other mandate we have is that we are a very powerful convening platform where we bring together different stakeholders to be able to share on some of the impactful or innovative research and impact practices. As you are aware, that Africa actually is subjected to quite a range of research activities. And the aspect of impact of this research still remains very, very weak. And this also is a challenge in the sense that research has not gotten the political goodwill that Africa requires. And so most African countries still have less than 1% of their GDP investments in research and development. And with that background, and building on that mandate that I've mentioned, today we want to have a conversation. As I've said, we are a big convener on issues that face the continent. And we are also a convener in terms of bringing stakeholders together to generate knowledge that informs some of the developmental priorities of the continent. And one of that is climate change. And in this particular case, the issues around adaptation. Climate change remains a major challenge to the Africa's development trajectory, not just at the macro level where GDP and economic growth is expected, but also at the micro level, at the household, at the community levels, where vulnerabilities and the impacts have been reported. And I don't have to repeat that because I think most of us understand this. Now, we are here to discuss a very strategic moment in the global progress or the global action against climate change. That is the global goal on adaptation, which has been enacted or has been initiated to be able to support or create visibility of adaptation at the global level, but also to help in providing a tracking mechanism or a monitoring mechanism on how our adaptation efforts are actually delivering results, because there has been a long line of adaptation interventions since the era of climate change discussions. But the question is, are we getting better or are we getting worse, especially for the vulnerable community? So the global goal on adaptation with the associated processes and indicators helps us to really understand those particular conversations or those particular outcomes that result from the adaptation investments. And for Africa, I think this is very critical because Africa played a major role in terms of driving the global goal on adaptation. Of course, through high-level political engagements, the Committee of Africa Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, the AMICEN, through the technical support of the Africa Group of Negotiators, there was a lot of efforts to really raise adaptation ambitions to the level at which we see mitigation today. And some of those advocacies actually led to the establishment of the global goal on adaptation. And of course, the GGA is not coming on top of a vacuum. It's coming on top of an ambitious political system that is already prioritizing adaptation through a number of interventions, the NDCs, the NAPs that are already existing, in addition to a number of regional adaptation interventions that are already taking place, such as the Africa Adaptation Accelerator Program, the Africa Adaptation Initiative, a number of initiatives by the Africa Development Bank. So adaptation is really a priority for the African governments. And so the political ambition around adaptation is very critical, and the associated political ambition around the global goal on adaptation is even more important at this moment. But the big question that we are asking today is that this big political ambition that the global goal on adaptation comes with, is it going to translate into enhanced adaptation action that reduces vulnerabilities of the most affected communities in Africa? What does it mean for Africa? And therefore, in this conversation, which again, as you'll see later, is linked or will be leading to providing some insights that will feed into this year's Africa State of Adaptation report, that is the SOA 2025, which is focusing on the global goal on adaptation. So the critical questions, let's go back to the previous slide, Edna, that perhaps we need to reflect in this conversation. One is that really the political ambition which is there, as I've said, will it yield the tangible results for Africa in the context of the GGA process and what is coming out? And there are concerns also, and these were issues that were raised in our first webinar, that, is it possible that the global goal on adaptation, there is a risk that it could redirect local actions to global targets rather than local needs? Are there adequate structures to integrate community voices in the process? And if not, what can we do as stakeholders to ensure that the GGA process is not a technocentric process, but a process that is helpful to the African people, and is a process that is conversational, adaptive, and provides useful feedback to the process? And finally, there were a number of concerns raised at the SB 62 in Bonn in June this year. And some of these concerns are very critical. And these, are concerns that relate to overlap of the GGA process with the other programs, such as the Nairobi Work Program and other adaptation initiatives. How is the GGA process going to align with existing programs to ensure its effectiveness? Issues of inclusivity and gender considerations remain really very weak to date in the GGA process. How can those be addressed? The presentation at the SB 62 provided a list of indicators, and there were a lot of concerns around the fact that most of the indicators were output-oriented rather than outcome-oriented. And therefore, there were questions around what is the difference between the GGA indicators and the normal developmental indicators that we have seen under the Sustainable Development Goals. So what is new? So these are questions that are important for the African adaptation ecosystem. And therefore, we bring this global community to help us discuss and try to see how we can get some solutions towards that. Next slide. And of course, as I've said, the whole conversation today feeds into this year's State of Adaptation report for Africa, which Dr. Kotum from the Africa Adaptation Initiative will be talking about shortly. But this report is one of its kind because it's actually trying to interrogate and engage with this global political ambition and bring it to the realities of Africa. So we are leading the development of this report, but it's a multi-stakeholder process that will see the delivery of a report to be launched at COP30 at the end of the year, during those conversations. So as you can see, the SOA report is focusing on three main areas. First is just the preliminaries, what we know about adaptation. The second part is just to look at the themes or the sectors that the global goal on adaptation is focusing on. And the third part is how do we enable effective implementation of those targets under the GGA. I guess this is my last point, and I want to say thank you so much, and invite all of us to engage in this conversation. It's a very important conversation. I remember in the last webinar, over 70% of the participants actually mentioned that they. Okay, Humphrey, I guess I already finished my remarks, so let me give it back to you. Welcome other speakers. We can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johannes Atela, and apologies for that hitch. Indeed, you have provided some insights and trying to explain that there is need for realignment between the political ambitions and the adaptation needs, and the need why Africa is coming in strongly to also contribute to providing those solutions that are local, that are context specific, that will address the climate change that Africa is experiencing, despite that we contribute less to the greenhouse gas emissions. You have brought out the issue of indicators and is very critical. And this now takes us to the next aspect on the program, that is looking at the state of adaptation report process. And just to indicate that Africa Research and Impact Network is the organization that is contributing to the development of this significant report on behalf of the Africa Adaptation Initiative. And I want to invite Charles to give some insights on the SOA process, even as we continue. Welcome, Charles. Charles, are you ready?
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So the status of adaptation report, which was commissioned by the Africa Adaptation Initiative and Africa Research and Impact Network, tasked with the technical assignment of drafting and engaging with the different experts and organizations, is looking at positioning Africa in terms of what is already happening within the adaptation space in Africa, and also what are some of the gaps that needs to be filled. But also it's looking at also the GGA process in terms of within the GGA process, for instance, how Africa is positioned is very important. So there is a whole chapter which is looking into that, but is already building into the political and negotiation momentum that is already ongoing. And we have had reviewers, different experts who have already been brought on board to support in terms of looking at the document, if it is speaking from also the negotiators, using the negotiators and political language, but infusing the scientific, what has been happening in the field of adaptation, particularly from research and scientific perspective. So we'll be having a whole workshop at the Africa Climate Summit, where you are all invited to come and make some input, in addition also to the reviewers who have seen. A number of reviewers are also part of this conversation. And then definitely what we need to look at is the language, because this is done by researchers and scientists. We have also to really position it to speak the voice of the local communities in Africa and what African countries are really aspiring to achieve within the adaptation conversation. Thank you so much. Back to you, Dr. Givy.
Thank you very much, Charles, for those insights. Indeed, SOA process will be very critical even as we move towards the COP30, because this will provide the real context in terms of what is existing, what we have done, the readiness of African countries with regards to adaptation. And then also it will provide a framework on the means of implementation with regards to the finance, with regards to technologies, among other things, and also provide recommendations on what next we need to do as African countries. And it is on that now that I want to bring in now the other speakers for the day. And we are going to look at the relevance of the emerging GGA indicators with regards to the different GGA thematic sectors. And it is at this juncture that I want to invite the next speaker, who is going to talk about the water sector, and that is none other than Osman Saidu. Saidu, I hope you are with us. I want to take this opportunity to invite you to give some reflections with regards to the water chapter. Welcome.
I am with you, but I cannot share my presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Just confirm that you can see the screen.
I can see the screen. Okay, you're sharing my presentation. Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. So I'm Dr. Usman Saidu, part of the Water Expert Group, and I am based in Ottawa. I'm a professor. So today I'm going to present what we're going, the challenges we're facing developing these indicators, and then maybe answer some of the questions asked at the beginning of this meeting. Next slide, please.
Yes, just a minute.
So, yeah, a brief recall for those who are not familiar with the work under the UI BLM work program. It's we're working on 11 targets, 7 thematic target and 4 dimensional target. One of the thematic target is water, but you also have health, ecosystems, poverty and livelihood, and so on. We are 78 experts, one group of experts working on each target relatively independently, but we're coordinating. And our task is to develop a manageable, globally applicable set of no more than 100 indicators that will measure progress towards the target identified in the UAA BLM framework, include indicator on mean of implementation, and support the assessment of the global goal of adaptation in future global stock takes. So we started about 1 year ago. We started with now more than 9,000 indicators proposed by parties. And then for SB62, we came up with 490 using different methodology across groups. And then now we have the mandate of reducing the list to 100, which is a challenge. And this is what we're working on. Next slide, please. I think one important question which I feel is not answered and which is quite important is how these 100 indicators are going to be used in future adaptation decision, because this is all about adaptation. And there are two possibilities. Either future adaptation decisions are going to heavily rely on these 100 indicators, excluding any other. So parties are going to religiously come to the decision and say, these are indicators we worked on. And in that case, local context has to be captured, despite the fact that text is globally applicable. Local context has to be captured because each country needs its local context captured. Comprehensiveness is going to be critical. If we're going to stick to this 100 indicator, if we forget a particular area, it's not going to receive attention or funding. And there should also be a balance between type of indicators. So for a particular sector, there are going to be input indicator, process indicator, outcome, and they tell different stories. If we focus on the outcomes only, we will not know whether how much finance is going into adaptation and how efficient the finance is. If we focus on the input only, we're not going to have the outcome. So for this 100 indicator to give us the whole picture, we need both all type of indicator, which is a challenge if we're restricted to 100. And finally, if people are going to rely heavily on this 100 indicator, we have to bring in existing indicator, because existing indicator which are telling a story, they're not new, it's not, it doesn't look novel, but they are relevant. So we need to bring them in. If not, important aspects are going to be lost. The second possibility, the 100 indicator are meant to complement existing knowledge. So these are going to be used in conjunction with SDGs, Sunday, and so on. And then in that case, we can put emphasis on new indicators which are more adaptation relevant and so on. And it's going to be more value added because there's going to be more information. We will steer away from existing indicator because there's no added value of having the same indicator in the set and outside the set if it's going to be used. But of course, this is going to imply more effort from to develop new indicator, collect the data, develop the methodology, put the data pipelines in place. But that are the one question which needs to be answered. For me, it's not yet answered. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the case of the water indicator, our understanding is more the first one, that these 100 indicators are going to be heavily relied on. And we really, we use a lot of SDG and Sendai indicator for the simple reason that they are definitely relevant for us, not necessarily for everybody. And they have the data infrastructure in place, they're being reported, so it's way less reporting burden. So it was criticized that it's not new, it's not adaptation specific, which is kind of true, but we propose to modify them. So now we're working to answer the concern from SB62, so we're trying to make them more adaptation relevant. So for instance, on the right, you have a few examples of indicators we have proposed. Level of water stress, degree of integrated water management, damage to critical infrastructure, number of people displaced because of floods and droughts. So these were criticized. They are existing. They're not adaptation relevant. They're not new. And next slide, please. So we're working to make, we think these are relevant. So for instance, I take one indicator, level of water stress, freshwater withdrawal as a proportion of available water resources. So this level of water stress can change in the future, but it can change for different reasons, not necessarily adaptation. So even if you don't adapt, it might go up and down. So there are some areas which are projected to be warming. So water stress in the future might go down in this area without you doing any adaptation. So just measuring the water stress will not tell you whether you're adapting well or not, because you will not know what is the impact of adaptation versus what other factor you don't control. So we propose to, I mean, it's still under discussion, it's not final, but we are proposing reduction in water stress, which is defined as freshwater withdrawal as proportion of available water resource as a result of adaptation action. So now we turn it into more adaptation specific. It's still the old indicator, it's still relevant, but this is going to bring a methodological issue, because if you want to know the difference between whether you implemented adaptation action or not, this is a difference of two quantities, and you can only measure one. So if you're monitoring, you will measure. If you have adapted, you're going to measure impact, including effect of adaptation. If you're not adapting, impact without the effect of adaptation, but you cannot measure the two. Only one will happen. So how are you going to make the difference? It means that it will not only be about monitoring, you're going to have a way to attribute the impact of adaptation. Next slide, please. So here are other indicators also which we took still with the spirit of the SDGs, but we're trying to make them more adaptation relevant. So for instance, degree of integrated water resource management. I am a water resource engineer. I'm teaching that, and when I hear people say this is not related to adaptation, I'm kind of shocked, because yes, this is a way to adapt to climate change. If you correctly manage your water resources, your system is going to be more resilient. You will be able to prevent water stresses, but it's not explicit in the title. And then maybe people, if it's not written adaptation, it's not adaptation relevant, which is not, I believe, okay. So we are proposing to reformulate it as percentage of basin and aquifer area, transboundary and national, under cooperative climate religion and water management, which is still water resource management, but now it is more explicit. Maybe it's easier to communicate. So I'm not going to do the two other. That's the spirit. This is how we're working. So basically, we think there's a lot of value in existing indicator. We can make them more adaptation relevant. And this is not about novelty. This is about relevance. This is about what can really drive adaptation correctly. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you again for inviting me, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Osman Saidu. Indeed, you have taken us through the process that is beginning from global, where the indicators began from, and you have now narrowed down to the water sector. That is very critical. And what is coming out is that by the time we have the meeting in Nairobi, we shall have arrived at around 15 indicators under the water sector, and that is very important. And the aim actually of these indicators majorly will be to reduce water stress that are associated with climate change, and that is the right direction. Thank you very much. I think participants, if you have a question for Mr. Osman, just prepare it. You can maybe add it in the chat box. We shall be able to respond to it, or when it reaches time for question and answer, we shall give you that opportunity to ask your question, because this is very critical even for the GGA process and as we move towards COP30. It is at this juncture that I want to invite another key expert who is with us today. And this is none other than Dr. Lucy Njuguna. Dr. Lucy Njuguna is going to discuss with us the GGA indicators with respect to food and agriculture chapter. Dr. Lucy, welcome. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Irene, for convening this webinar and also for inviting us to speak specifically on the food and agriculture. As it has been mentioned, I'm one of the experts supporting the GGA work, specifically in developing indicators for Target 9B, which is on food and agriculture. And I think I'll build a lot on what especially Dr. Taylor had started in his keynote speech, and also building on what Osman has just presented, and it's very good that he has already covered the background around the work of the experts. And for us, with the focus on the food and agriculture, of course, this is quite critical to the continent, to the African continent, given that we know already more than 80% of the African NDCs and NAPs already highlighted how agriculture is affected by climate change and the need to focus adaptation efforts in this particular sector. And we know that the NAPs and NDCs from the African continent already highlight some of the key steps that the countries want to take to make sure that we are building resilience within the sector. And so the focus, of course, of the fact that we have a food and agriculture theme within the GGA is quite important. And it gives us an entry point to make sure that then the priorities that we have are clearly highlighted even when we get to developing indicators for assessing progress along the GGA. And the target itself, just as a recap, it communicates an ambition towards attaining climate resilient food and agricultural production and supply and distribution of food, as well as increasing sustainable and regenerative production and equitable access to adequate food and nutrition for all by 2030. So you can see already the target itself, it has highlighted a number of key things that we need to see being captured even as we develop indicators. And as we're working on our mandate as experts in developing indicators, the various components that have been highlighted in the specific targets are actually one of our guiding principles in terms of making sure that the indicators are not only relevant to the different contexts, but they are also aligned with the components within those targets. And then just a recap of where we were at by the time we were going to the SB 62. And this was based on our understanding that the process of developing indicators by the experts would be technical, in the sense that we would have a mandate to highlight all the indicators that we think would be crucial for assessing the GGA, of course, considering that this list needed to be manageable, of course, working from the almost 10,000 indicators that Osman just mentioned, but providing negotiators with a list that they can then take through the political process to arrive to the less than 100 that they had already aimed to achieve. And this was clarified through the COP29 decision. So our understanding was that we would have a list that then would be negotiated down to 100. So that means by the time we were presenting the recommended indicators, by the time we're going to the SB 62, we had a total of 490, with various indicators being distributed across the different targets. And specifically for food and agriculture, we had 66 recommended indicators, which were categorized into 13 headline indicators and 53 sub-indicators. And the idea behind this was that we would provide high-level aspects that would be assessed based on the headline indicators, but then the sub-indicators would provide a pathway through which countries could select sub-indicators that are relevant to them and they report against this. And this would mean that, for example, then when we consider key adaptation issues and key adaptation practices within Africa, then you can go in within the sub-indicators and see which of these sub-indicators highlight practices and technologies that are relevant for food and agriculture in Africa. And that's what a country would be reporting against. But then now we have a new, more urgent task, because we have to reduce from the 490 that we submitted before before SB sessions to get to not more than 100. So it means for us, even for the food and agriculture sector, we have to work towards coming from the 66 that we had recommended to something around 10 to 12 indicators based on the distribution that we've provided for each of the targets. And I think even just noting based on some of the comments that Dr. Teller mentioned that were quite contentious when it came to the discussions at the SB 62, I think the indicators that we provided for food and agriculture was somehow a contrast to what was some of the concerns that were being raised, given that, for example, for our agriculture group, it was one of the few groups that actually took a very robust conceptual approach to make sure that we are working even from a conceptual framework that guides us on what are the key aspects that relate to climate change within the food and agriculture sector across contexts, not just for Africa, to make sure that then this informs the kinds of indicators we have within the framework. And with this conceptual approach, it means that, well, some indicators that we have on the list could be seen to have a connection to other frameworks. For example, the SDGs or the Sendai framework, because they are part of a framework that also connects, for example, the climate shocks and the drivers of climate change impacts within the food and agriculture sector, then these are linked to particular adaptation practices and technologies, and further to indicators that show us the outcomes of those practices and technologies. We could confidently say that the indicators that we put forward are actually adaptation indicators and not development indicators. And then the other aspect is that a majority of our indicators were actually impact indicators. So these are indicators that would demonstrate the effectiveness and adequacy of adaptation, thus stemming further from this categorization that was seen that most of the indicators that were put forward by experts were process or output indicators. But then where we are at the moment, we of course then, as I mentioned, have to narrow down from 66 indicators to around 10 to 12. But at the same time, we want to make sure that key and critical adaptation aspects, when we consider different contexts, whether it's within Africa and elsewhere, are actually captured in these 10 to 12 indicators. So then we have to do a lot of consolidation. So some of the specific aspects that we are trying to get into with the sub-indicators have been consolidated, and a lot of that information would be moved either as options for disaggregating data for specific indicators or in the definition of the indicator. And the indicators themselves, so that we are able to capture a more comprehensive picture of adaptation, we have now a set of indicators that would be capturing adaptation as a process. So these indicators are specifically put within the framework to assess the uptake or the adoption of climate resilient practices and technologies. And one way that we are recognizing the differences in context. So for example, if you look at food and agriculture sector within Africa, a lot of which, actually a majority, more than 95%, is land-based and rain-fed. So this means that even in the selection of the indicators that can help us understand the uptake of climate resilient practices and technologies, we've provided two complementary indicators. So one of them looks at the proportion of agricultural land that is under climate resilient technologies and practices, which would be quite important for Africa to make sure that we are also reflecting the land-based aspect of agriculture. But then we also provide an option that is looking more at agricultural sector actors across the agricultural value chain and the extent to which they have adopted climate resilient technologies and practices. And this other second indicator is with an interest that then countries that are not necessarily using land-based agriculture can be able to report under that. But at the same time, it gives us an opportunity that even as we then consider the relevance of the two indicators for Africa, is not just looking at land, but we're also looking at the key players, the farmers themselves, the producers, and also looking at the other value chain actors, including processors and suppliers. And with this second option that is looking at the actors, we also provide then an option to disaggregate so that you're capturing the role of, for example, smallholder farmers versus other agricultural sectors that are more focused on commercial or large-scale farming. So that's one of the main categories of the indicators that we have within our list. The other category is looking at indicators that will help us to understand adaptation outcomes and the impact of climate change. And in a way, this set of indicators helps us to understand adaptation effectiveness and adequacy. And some of these indicators, for example, then link those adaptation practices that are within the first category with key outcomes, such as issues of food and nutrition security and how it's impacted by climate change. We're also looking at how climate change is also affecting agricultural production. And in this case, it gets into the details of livestock, crops, fisheries, and so forth. But then it's not just limiting the consideration of food and agriculture within target 9B, but it's also how we are making linkages with the other targets. So, for example, we know for issues of water are quite critical for agricultural production. And so we are also liaising with the water group to see how is the water aspect and how it becomes like a mechanism through which climate impacts are also transferred to agricultural sector. And also as a very useful resource for adaptation is captured within the indicators for the water target. And at the same time, it's how we then capture the role of agriculture within Africa in relation to poverty and livelihoods. And then that means we are in conversation with Target 9F group that is looking at indicators for poverty and livelihoods. And the other way is also considering how food and agriculture as a sector is addressed within the dimensional targets. When it comes to, for example, the consideration of the needs of the food and agriculture sector as we look at the national adaptation plans. So that means that we are not just limiting the consideration of food and agriculture and the needs for the different contexts within just target 9B, but it's also how this is addressed across the other targets. And I believe through this, then we can be able to make sure that all the adaptation priorities and needs, as well as the need to understand the impact and effectiveness of adaptation in responding to climate shocks, and especially considering vulnerable contexts such as Africa, are adequately addressed. I'll stop it at that and looking forward to the discussion and questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lucy. Indeed, that was very great, trying to dissect what we have with regards to this important chapter, food and agriculture. And indeed, it is important for us to realize the way you have stated the linkage between this particular sector and other sectors, for example, water and also ecosystems. It is very critical that this chapter indeed be given quite a huge importance, bearing in mind that most of the African population rely basically on this chapter, and despite that, then that it is the most affected chapter. So it is important that then when it comes to the GGA indicators, then it is given most of the relevance that it deserves. I know there will be many questions that you will come to you, and we look forward to even helping in terms of responding to them. And it is important to note that even as we are in this meeting, that we are also contributing to the discussions that will come up during the COP30. So we are privileged to even contribute to that. And it is at this juncture that I want now to invite our next keynote specialist, who will be taking us through the other thematic chapter or sector, that is poverty and livelihoods. This is also a key important sector, and who the key specialist who will be taking us through this chapter is none other than Portia Adede Williams. And I take now this opportunity to officially invite you to take us through the chapter. Welcome, Portia. Thank you. Thank you. I'm told that even as we prepare maybe to bring her on board, I've been advised to go to the next one. Maybe she will come in at a later stage. I now maybe want to invite Timo. Timo, are you with us? Timo, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And
thank you very much.
My camera is working.
Yeah, even as you try to project, yeah, Timo will be taking us through what we call the cross-cutting sectors, just to help us understand what are these cross-cutting sectors and how will the GGA indicators fit into that particular context. So it is important for us to be also keen around this particular area. Timo, now the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. My name is Timo. I'm from the London School of Economics. Just getting this to full screen. And yeah, I'm also one of the experts in the expert group. And I coordinate the group that looks into the 4 indicators around the policy cycle. That means assessing adaptation, planning for adaptation, implementing adaptation, and monitoring and evaluation. and we've already heard from Osmane and Lucy, who are from the water and agriculture groups. Just to give you an overview, Osmane has already shared the background of our current work. So the most recent task that we as the expert group, and we are 78 experts that we have received, is to shorten the list to no more than 100 globally applicable indicators. So this is our task that we are completing this month. And also importantly, these 100 indicators have to capture all of the 11 global targets in a GGA framework, including means of implementation and all the subcomponents of the targets. So it's important to keep in mind that each of the 11 targets consists of multiple sub-targets or subcomponents. And if we add those up, we get to around 35 subcomponents. And here, if you look at the numbers, that's where you understand the challenges that we are facing, because we have to, with these 100 indicators, we have to cover 35 subcomponents. Subcomponents could be, for example, resistance to water-related climate disasters or poverty-related aspects. And then also these 100 indicators have to account for means of implementation and for cross-cutting considerations like gender, indigenous communities, local communities, biodiversity, and other aspects. And that really shows that at the end of the day, there can only be maybe 2 or 3 indicators for each of these very important subcomponents. And that already shows you the limits of this exercise. So even so, 100 sounds like a large number, given that it's covering such a breadth of topics from agriculture, water, cultural heritage, infrastructure, health, basically everything, almost similar to the SDGs. It is actually quite challenging to capture that in 100 indicators. So therefore, I wanted to explain at the outset that this means that the indicators will not be able to include, each and every detail that we would want to include, simply because they're just 100. Also, very importantly, and Osmane already spoke to this important aspect. I mean, what do these indicators mean? What is the role of this list of 100 indicators? What do they do, and what can they not do? This is a very important aspect, and Osmane has presented already 2 different scenarios. First, it is important that this is a global assessment. In the task that we have received that I showed on the previous slide, it said 100 globally applicable indicators. So first and foremost, this is a global assessment used to understand if collectively all countries are on track and making progress to achieving the framework for the global goal on adaptation. So countries have been already invited as per a decision from the recent COP to use the GGA targets in their next round of biennial transparency reports. These are the reports that countries have to submit every 2 years to report on progress and implementation. Countries have also already decided that the targets, and therefore most likely the indicators, will be used in the second global stocktake that's due in 2028. And also, as Osmane already introduced, the indicators draw quite a bit from existing frameworks, especially from the Sender framework and the SDGs. And another interesting aspect is that since the SDGs are going until 2030, should the SDGs have a successor of global targets, then the current list of indicators could inform the future indicators under the successor of the SDGs. So that's a byproduct or potentially co-benefit. Also, I wanted to therefore explain what this list of indicators does not do. Because there can only be very few indicators, this list of indicators does not substitute for the need for every country to have its own context-specific national adaptation monitoring and evaluation system and indicators that are specific and are tailored to the circumstances of every country, and especially, of course, in the African context. I've been living for 2 years in Tanzania, where I've been working very closely with many stakeholders and government departments to support Tanzania's adaptation process. And so, this is just an example of how every country will have to have its own set of indicators, and even more so at the local level. So these 100 indicators are just a global snapshot. They can never substitute for the need to have context-specific indicators and local or project-specific indicators that meet the respective purpose of the M&E system. So as the outset, I think this is very important to understand what we're doing, and also the fact that if something is not included in the global indicators but is super relevant for adaptation, then it would be relevant for the state of adaptation in Africa report to pick this up. And now I wanted to speak briefly on the 4 indicators we have under paragraph 10. So we have the first one is the impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment. And what you see on the slide are the components that these targets have. So the components here are that every country has conducted a risk assessment on adaptation, that by 2027, every country has multi-hazard early warning systems and have established climate information and services. And so what we're doing is, because we also have to keep in mind the burden, so to reduce the reporting burden on countries, especially, of course, in an African context, and especially for LDCs. So we are drawing on, as much as possible, on existing reports. There is a global report annually on multi-hazard early warning systems that we're drawing from, also a report that the World Meteorological Organization is preparing on the state of climate services. So we're drawing on those existing data sources and reports. For planning, there are 2 components. One is on national adaptation plans. And in fact, there's a study that was published last year that Lucy has been co-authoring on Africa's NDCs and NAPs. And so we are building on those studies and also on the adaptation gap report from UNEP, which every year assesses the state of planning on adaptation worldwide. And the difficult bit in this component is, this target is to measure mainstreaming of adaptation. So ideally, we would measure not just the adaptation plans, but also the extent to which adaptation is mainstreamed into development planning and budgeting. And this is challenging to do this in a standardized way. So this also shows you that, it's one thing to suggest an indicator, degree of adaptation in development planning. And the other aspect is then how to measure that in a standardized way globally. And that is future work that still needs to be done, even after this list of 100 indicators has hopefully been agreed to at the COP. On monitoring and evaluation, the indicator basically is that every country has a country-specific national adaptation M&E system and has the capacity to implement it. And now coming to implementation target. So the implementation target says that every country has progressed in implementing its national adaptation plans, which we are suggesting to measure through the extent to which countries are implementing the actions in their NAPs or in related policy instruments, and the extent to which they are achieving their targets. Of course, this depends on the information that every country provides to the international community in order to measure this indicator. And under this target, we have also groups of means of implementation indicators for climate finance, capacity building, technology transfer, and Laxon, who may still be speaking in today's webinar, he convened a workshop recently from the Africa Climate and from the African Climate and Development Initiative, where these indicators were further developed. So in conclusion, what we are facing is the situation that we can only have very few indicators for every component, and we have to make sure that these indicators are robust and importantly that they carry ambition because we want these 100 indicators to measure high ambition on adaptation so that they really provide an incentive for countries to do more in adaptation. And because that's ultimately what we want. We don't want a list of indicators just for accountability purposes, but we want these indicators to make a difference. And that's the challenge we are facing. And I'm very much looking forward to the workshop, which we will have in 2 weeks' time in Nairobi, Kenya, to further work on this list. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, that was also insightful on the cross-cutting sectors by Timo. We do appreciate and just bringing out the issue that despite cross-cutting sectors being many and also being affected by climate change, that the number of indicators that have been assigned there are a few. So there is need really to ensure that we contextualize those indicators, we make them robust, and also we bring in that issue you have also indicated, the high ambition. But what is important in all this is that as much as we are discussing about indicators, there is need to bring in the local context in each of these indicators and to make them contextual. And indeed, that is very grateful. Now, I want to take this opportunity to invite Dr. Laxon, who is going to take us through also a very critical thematic area, and that is cultural heritage. Dr. Laxon, welcome, and take us through that chapter.
Thank you so much, Agev, and thanks to the previous speakers, the technical experts that are here, that if you listen to the first speaker up to the previous one, Timo, it tells you how complex that process is to try and come up with global indicators that would help you understand how progress is taking place, starting from a finer, level of measurement as local community up to the global. So to have something that would be able to reflect progress on that wide scale is something that is very difficult. And I think that's why we have heard what these indicators can do and what these indicators cannot do. But my talk today is going to focus on, like I've said, one of the important sectors that we have in the GGA, which is the cultural heritage. And the reason why I'm saying this is an important sector is because this is where, within the targets in the framework, where indigenous and local knowledge is specifically mentioned. And we know that there are millions of African communities, local communities, that use and rely on indigenous, traditional, local knowledge. So in this target, we have an opportunity to come up with some really good indicators that would be able to assess the progress that the indigenous and local knowledge is making towards achieving resilience of communities and biodiversity and economy in the African region. So as a starting point, just to kick off my talk is what we observe from the IPCC last assessment cycle. It noted that with high confidence that African cultural heritage is already at risk from climate hazards, including sea level rise and coastal erosion. And this is because we have so many important heritage sites, monuments that are in coastal areas from Cape to Cairo. We have, I think we have the highest number of cultural heritage monuments, sites that are at risk in coastal areas than any other region. And that alone tells you what adaptation would be required and why adaptation matters for cultural heritage in the region, and what sort of indicators that would help us to understand the progress that is being made towards achieving resilience of all these important sites. And also, it also concludes that most of African heritage sites are neither prepared for nor adapted to future climate change. And this again speaks to the point why it is very important to have indicators that are not just tracking progress, but that are also raising ambition to make sure that adaptation within the sector would be able to address future risk. Yes. And coming back to the indicators, the target itself has got about 4 components, mainly 3, and we have the overarching component, which is more like a primary objective of the indicator, which is to protect cultural heritage and cultural practices. So in our quest to come up with global indicators for GGA, we are focusing on indicators that should be able to show progress within 3 components, and one of it is how adaptation in the cultural heritage sector is reducing climate impacts, and also what are the adaptive strategies that are being developed and implemented to preserve cultural heritage and cultural practices, and also how this process can be able to design climate resilient responses to protect all forms of cultural heritage. And given that I had the opportunity to speak after everyone, I sort of cannot get into all these challenges and the progress to date that has been covered by the previous speakers. So I'm going to focus mainly on what are the African priorities in this GGA indicator development for the cultural heritage sector. One of the main priorities that the indicators should do is to try and understand the progress within the sector on how cultural heritage at risk. This includes tangible, which is the cultural heritage sites I have alluded to, and also intangible, like all those cultural practices that are being threatened by climate change. So we are prioritizing indicators that should be able to show how cultural heritage at risk is being protected by implementation of different adaptation actions, measures, and responses. We are also looking at indicators that not just focus on the risk, but also recognizing the role of Africa's traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge, its contribution to adaptation. And to date, some of the constraints that we have faced include the limited existence of indicators that mainly for cultural heritage and adaptation. I think it's almost none in terms of the multilateral indicators, multilateral processes that have approved indicators that focus on cultural heritage and adaptation. UNESCO is in the process of developing what they're calling cultural climate resilience indicators for cultural heritage, something like that for culture. But it's still an ongoing process. And the key point here is due to lack of existing indicators, it means issues around data becomes a big talking point, because after you develop the indicators, they need to have some form of data coming from somewhere. And if you don't have existing processes, existing platforms that should be able to put together all this data, it becomes a very challenge and starting point. And also, like I said, if you listen to stuff around culture and indigenous and local knowledge, most of it is qualitative. So how do you capture all those qualitative aspects that are happening in a very localized local context, and try and present that at a very high level global scale? It's a very big challenge. And one of the things that we hope initiatives like what Arin is doing is probably maybe make that connection between, at the end, when we have these global indicators for cultural heritage, how do we make them locally relevant? How do we make them locally applicable? Or what can we learn when we develop indicators for local communities, or indicators that would be able to assess progress from a lot of adaptation that is localized, like at a community-based level. And also, in most cases, it is difficult to quantify the cultural heritage. And this is because, like I said, some of it is intangible heritage. So to come up within an indicator that would show both the qualitative and the quantitative aspect at a global level, it's very difficult. So we hope that as this process continues to evolve, initiatives like what Arin is doing with locally led adaptation indicators, it would have give the opportunity to make that connection between GGA global indicators on cultural heritage vis-a-vis the local indicators. And I'm happy that Timo said this is not the end, and this is not defining what countries should not do, and what so this is giving a guiding framework on taking issues at the global level, but it is not limiting our countries at a very local or national level on developing context-specific indicators that would capture all these different progress on climate adaptation. So, and I think at the end of the process, we hope that there's going to be a follow-up of how do you make these global indicators relevant to the local context. And we hope that Arin, through this project, would be able to achieve some of these aspects. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lacson. Indeed, cultural heritage also is another thematic area. And I'm happy that you brought the aspect of indigenous and local knowledge. And looking at it in that dimension, then you may also find that some of the aspects that are being discussed within this chapter are cross-cutting, because there could be a number of also adaptation interventions within agriculture, within water, that may integrate some of the things around cultural heritage. And one of the also other things that you have brought out is the issue of how do we quantify the qualitative aspects of the culture, among other things. So this is also very critical, and there is need, even as the global indicators are being developed, then there is need for now as Africans that we try and come up with strategies that will, in addition to quantifying these indicators, we also look at what are some of the qualitative aspects that are key, that we can be able to get from the communities, and how can they feed into the global GGA indicators and discussion. Thank you very much. And of course, what I also need to indicate that it is important to understand that we are lucky as Africans, because we have people on that platform, in that committee that we are calling experts, that are giving the directionality into which then Africa should take when it comes to adaptation interventions and the GGA discussions. And now moving on to the next session of this critical webinar, I would like now to bring in now other speakers now who are going to bring now the local or case study contexts that are being already initiatives, interventions, or projects that are being implemented at local level, and they are also critical when it comes to the GGA indicators. And as even we wait for the final GGA indicators now to be published, then we do understand that these case studies will be very relevant because they will feed into the global goal and adaptation indicators. And they will also provide a platform for upscaling into other regions where maybe we can be able to learn and maybe implement, so that the entire continent now is maybe implementing projects that are geared towards achieving the indicators that then will be discussed in the COP30. And it is at this juncture then that I want to invite Dr. Isaiah Marquette. Dr. Isaiah Marquette is going to take us through a very important project that we call LAMA, that is being implemented in Kenya and Benin, of course, looking at how we can be able to develop what you call locally led adaptation metrics for Africa. And of course, he will also explain how this feeds into the GGA process. It is now your turn, Dr. Isaiah, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. I want to appreciate the tone that has been said by the previous speakers. And at this point, I want to connect from where Lakson has just left, whereby he emphasized on the need to contextualize the indicators. So as ARIN, we are running the LAMA project, and this is speaking to the local context in terms of driving adaptive capacity. So in terms of the introduction to the locally led adaptation metrics, I'm going to speak about why are they important in this aspect. So one of the key things is that there's a missing link in terms of a dedicated bottom-up or community-led matrices that inform some of these bespoke initiatives that are embedded in driving climate action. So why we need the contextual or the locally led adaptation initiatives or indicators is for the reason of enhancing the decision making and also informing on the appropriate contextual technologies. For instance, designing a contextual technology that serves the arid region may not serve it equally at the wetland, for example. So having the locally led indicators is crucial to inform on the decisions. It's critical in informing the financing. And given that climate change risks are context specific in nature, then having the locally led adaptation indicators or matrices is quite crucial. Please go to the next slide. Yeah, so given that the climate change impacts are context specific and they need to have a locally led adaptation matrix, then there is need to co-create. Then there's need to have the community informing on the matrices or the indicators to better inform on the decision, to better inform on how to decentralize even financial resources, as well as the leadership capacity at the local level. So doing this, it brings out the essence of aligning some of the priorities of diverse social groups. And at the context level, we have the vulnerable, marginalized groups, the people at the remote or the last mile ends, the women, the elderly, the low income groups. So having the locally locally led adaptation that is co-created by the community is able to align such or amplify such voices in the critical junctures such as financing or directing finances to the main cause. The other one is that locally led adaptation matrices helps us to measure as well as to report on the effectiveness of some of the local initiatives in addressing critical intersectional vulnerabilities. I've mentioned just but a few along the gendered lens, along the socioeconomic lens. So these are essential in helping us to measure the impact as well as the effectiveness of some of the initiatives. And then also having the community-led initiatives is able to help us to link to some of the contextual lessons to the NAPs, to the NDCs, as well as the global goal on adaptation. Next. So part of the Llama project is having a go-to platform whereby we can draw lessons on the best practices that are context-specific, that are community co-created. So the Llama platform is based on two rationale ideologies. The first one is that frameworks and most of the tools for measuring adaptation are generally local-led principle exist, but then they do not, they sort of follow the top-down approach, and then they do not narrow to the specific. And given that climate change impacts are context-specific, then there is need to have a context-specific platform that speaks to differentiated, lessons, capturing lessons from the communities facing different climate vulnerabilities. So given that we do not have specific context-specific understanding, then there is exacerbated exclusions along the vulnerable communities, those who are on the end line, those who are on the low level of incomes. So the Llama platform serves to fill these gaps by fostering the learning and also consolidating some of the working locally led adaptation indicators. It is also going to serve as a convening platform whereby stakeholders can engage in some of the best practices around the locally led adaptation initiatives as well as the matrices. Also, this platform is going to facilitate the shared knowledge, experiences on some of the experiences, the tools, and the indicators that are working. So in terms of the relevance of this platform is actually to drive the equity and inclusiveness. It is in order to have the most affected communities or the groups being featured, their voices being amplified in the bigger platforms. The other thing is to demonstrate on the effectiveness of the locally led adaptation practices through simplification of the adaptation and the locally led solutions. And also this platform serves to provide an interactive go-to platform whereby some of the assessed, measured adaptation and locally led solutions can be shared, can be replicated in other contexts and see how adaptive they are. The other key importance or relevance is helping in tracking and reporting of the locally led adaptation initiatives, because it is one thing to direct resources to climate action, and it is the other thing to track some of the impact. How much is the, provided solution driving to what extent of impact in terms of the climate action? Next. So this is just a snippet of how the Llama platform is looking like. It is still work in progress, and we are going to make this to be context specific as much as possible to enable knowledge sharing in some of the working locally led adaptation initiatives. Next. So at this point, I'd like to provide just some of the fieldwork Llama highlights in terms of what we're doing currently in the Llama project. So if you've seen here that the snippet of the analysis we've done so far, we've seen that in terms of the land tenure system, which is one of the key indicators that we are going to measure in this project, we find that there is changing land ownership over time, whereby more female are now owning land, and then we're also having more adults and elderly female smallholder farmers having more land compared to the young and young generations. So this is just a snippet around what we are doing currently, whereby our focus here is to disaggregate the voices along the gendered lanes, along the age cohort, along the socioeconomic factors such as the income, education, and we are going to amplify the specific voices along these groups, along these social groups, to ensure that we capture the specific vulnerabilities, we capture specific, challenges that each of these social demographic group is facing. Next. Yeah, this is the continuous in terms of the land rights still on the land tenure, whereby we disaggregated some of the land rights ownership initiatives along, again, the gendered lines, as well as along the age cohort. So we realized that currently we have more elderly females owning land communally, and as well as being leaseholders. Then also we observe some balanced gendered partial land rights among the elderly, whereby we have 50 female, 50% male owning partial. Then we have also more young male leaseholders as compared to more female partial landholders. Next. So in terms of the farming systems, we observe that more females are embracing subsistence farming systems as compared to both subsistence and commercial, and cutting across all genders and all age cohorts. Commercial farming is still not adequately embraced for the reasons, because our target here are the vulnerable smallholder farmers. So you may realize that their small holding kind of subjects them to subsistence farming system practices. So this is just the snippet of what we're doing in the Llama project. And as I've mentioned, our key focus here is to have differentiated amplification of the voices along the socio-demographic and socioeconomic lens to ensure that no voice is segregated, no voice is left out in co-creation of these important locally led adaptation indicators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Isaiah. And indeed, now what Dr. Lacson was saying, that what is lacking in the indicators is getting the voices of the local communities, the aspirations. And indeed, when you look at the Llama project, then it provides a solution by then co-creating some of these metrics, some of these indicators with the different vulnerable groups, because these are the groups that are most affected. So indeed, then this is one of the solutions that will try to fill the gaps that may be left at the global level. And another important thing is that working with communities will unravel some of the gaps identified at the global level, and this indeed will then address those aspects within the adaptation framework. Moving on, then we want to hear from CDKN on the work they are doing. And it is at this juncture that I want to invite Esperanza Carajo, who is going to take us through the reflections from the experience in Kenya. And in the presentation or in the discussion, she's going to present some of the lessons, some of the gaps, and what is the way forward. So it is at this juncture that I invite Esperanza Carajo. Carajo, welcome.
Thank you so much, Humphrey, and thanks for having me. And I would also like to appreciate the past speakers for the detailed and insightful background on how they are contributing to the GGA process. And yes, as much as it's a global process, there's quite a lot of work that is supposed to happen at the country level. And I think that is some of the work that CDKN has started. So I'm just going to, next slide. I'm going just to be sharing about CDKN in Kenya and how our work is relevant to the GGA process and also how it might be relevant in the next global stocktake. Next slide, please. So just an overview of CDKN. We are a global Southern-based led program. It was founded in 2010, and we focus on 3 key areas. Our thematic areas are the first one, enhancing the integration of gender and social inclusion in both policies and practice. Second is strengthening the implementation of equitable and locally appropriate EBA and improving access to appropriate and equitable finance. And in Kenya, CDKN has been around since 2011, supported the first Kenya NCAP. And now in its 3rd phase, we are supporting the improvements, the accessibility to appropriate and equitable finance that enables locally led adaptation. So next slide, please. So the work started in Kenya in 2023, and we started by conducting a longitudinal functionality and governance study. And this study had already been conducted earlier. That is why it was longitudinal. It had been conducted earlier by the Adaptation Consortia, who are the pioneers of locally led actions in Kenya under the County Climate Change Fund mechanism, the CCFs. So through the CCF, they had done quite a number of adaptation investments in northern and eastern Kenya. And in this second study, we assessed 62 adaptation investments, which were mostly in water, so the water infrastructure. And the main purpose was to determine the factors that influence the effectiveness of these investments and also sustainability in the lifespan of these adaptation investments. Just to mention, they were public goods investments. And some of the gaps and lessons, we did have quite a number, but I'll just focus on monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning, because that is one of the gaps that CDKN decided to continue supporting Kenya on. But around that, indicators and metrics as a gaps and also as a lesson, we realized that so we do have indicators in Kenya and even at the county level, noting that this work was basically hosted under the counties, 5 counties, Kitui, Makueni, Isiolo, Garissa, and Wajir. And we realized that the indicators that exist and even the type of monitoring that they conduct is until implementation. So how much money goes into a project, what type of a project, who are the beneficiaries, and then that's it. But post-implementation, so when we want to evaluate the effectiveness of these investments, so post-implementation, thinking about the outcomes and the impacts, what changed, was food security increased, or was there a change for livelihoods? This was a hard part to actually try to get this data. We realized that this data and evidence is really important in ensuring that we are able to monitor and report the effectiveness of these investments, and therefore telling the story of adaptation that will need to be improved, or maybe this and different things. We had different impacts for different types of investments, or different processes and practices need to be improved. The other thing that came up is the feedback mechanism. We realized that there's limited flow of feedback from beneficiaries and stakeholders. And when that happens, it means that it is very unclear how feedback then would be used to improve these investments and even the management of them. But it also means that feedback cannot be used to inform other investments. So it's like reinventing new wheel every time there's need to actually put up an investment at that local level. And when we are trying to actually, like the former speaker said, ensuring that the voices and aspirations of the local communities are actually considered and they drive the investment processes, then if we don't have this feedback, it means that it's not being utilized and we are not really considering those voices. The other item that we found was a gap was a lack of data and evidence for decision making, basically from insufficient capacity and systems to generate reliable data. The counties have some M&D systems. We have what we call the county integrated monitoring and evaluation system. Some work, some do not work, and even that there's no digital platform that can really ensure they are capturing accurate data and to inform, of course, the other analysis and utilization of this data. That was a glaring gap. And the other thing was that there's really no dedicated funds for operations and maintenance and also M&E, despite these investments being made every other year. So meaning there's really no post-implementation information that is coming to inform really relevant and effective investments. And another thing that came up that is still very much tied to the need of an information knowledge system is that there is a need for cross-county and landscape investments. But then, and it requires quite some innovative financing models to be able to establish or implement such cross-county investments. But then there's still lack of data and evidence that supports this. And we need that to guide these cross-scale and landscape investments. In terms of opportunities, what we saw and what we wanted to support was first the identification for those that are already existing and those that we need new ones, relevant indicators and metrics. We find that there's quite a lot of information and knowledge in Kenya, but it sits in different offices. And with this, we decided to follow up that conversation with the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, and realized that there is a need for a system that actually collects data at that very local level, from project level, but collects the data at the county level, and then the county level then is able to convey that information to the national level. So we decided to partner with the Ministry of Environment and two counties, Vihiga County and Makueni County. And for this piece of work on developing a standardized, harmonized indicators handbook, a ministerial one at the Ministry of Environment is being led by WRI and supported by South North under the CDKN program and Agnes and Arin. And as former speakers have said, well, the indicators, as much as the global process is ongoing, once we are sure about those, also taking into consideration the national ones, then we do need a system that is, like a platform then that is able to help us in telling the adaptation story, making it visible to attracting funding from different sources, that is able to enable collection, analysis, and even the systematic use of this data for current investments, adaptive management, but also for informed decision making for policy and practice. So as CDK again, once we have these indicators, the standardized indicators, we would be using those as prompts and parameters in monitoring, evaluation, and learning platform that will enable the tracking, visualization, and reporting of these indicators. And the other part of work that supports the MAL work and indicators handbook is basically advocating for dedicated budget allocations for O&M, operation and maintenance, but also MAL, because this MAL tool, this MAL platform would need to be institutionalized. As Dr. Joannis mentioned, adaptation investment things are very political. And so we will need to institutionalize this platform at the county level, but also at the national level at the ministry, to ensure that at least both the county level and the national level are able to build, to document lessons learned and integrate them into governance and investment processes. As part of the process, we are also looking to, the entire process is co-created from the indicator handbook development to the MAL-tool development. And while at that in the co-creation process, but post that as well, we'll be supporting capacity building for the teams that are involved in the co-creation, but also in the use of this system. Next slide, please. So I think most of this has already been mentioned by the past speakers. It's the beauty of speaking last. But how relevant is the MAL tool to the GGA process? We are hoping all these are really like anticipated outcomes of the MAL tool, or rather the MAL platform. In ensuring accountability and transparency, we hope that this tool is going to support Kenya in tracking progress against the GGA targets, and of course demonstrating commitment and fostering trust, but also continuous evaluation and learning, that would allow policymakers and implementers to adjust strategies where need be, and interventions based on evidence, and overall improving the effectiveness and sustainability of these adaptation investments. In terms of advancing global and national goals, the anticipation is that the MAL tool, by providing a clear picture of progress and gaps, then the MAL system would really help in aligning the national actions with Kenya's international commitments, and therefore fostering the likelihood of achieving the GGA. As we anticipate the GST in 2028, we are thinking then the tool by that time will ensure that the global stocktake will accurately reflect progress. The MAL tool will enable the GST reflect progress, challenges and opportunities based on the feedback that has been provided on how these investments are actually addressing the needs of the communities, and of course communities to the national level, and enabling effective enhancement of climate actions. And also looking at in terms of encouraging learning and improvement, we are looking at facilitating that the tool can be able to facilitate sharing of lessons, like case study learned globally from the national level, but what can be shared at a global platform, promoting adaptive management at both countries that are already in the process, and move peer learning and also international levels. Yeah, I'll end it at that.
happy to hear your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esperanza. Indeed, there is already work going on at the community level. And as you have indicated, we do wait for the final indicators and then see how then what the communities are doing with this organization locally will feed into the global indicators. What you also brought out is the issue of monitoring and evaluation. The governance is very critical, bearing in mind that already Kenya have demonstrated the element of devolving climate finance. So, of course, the initiative that CDKA is doing, of course, will feed into what Kenya already has begun doing. And this already then demonstrates that this can be upscaled to other African countries so that all of us then move globally. Then we now move to the West. We want to hear now from Jean Pascal. And Jean Pascal is going to give us the reflections from Senegal. I'll give him some few minutes just to discuss with us what are some of the lessons from the local context and how do they shape both the national and global processes. Just to indicate that Jean Pascal will be talking in French. So if you want to listen to what he's saying, kindly go to the interpretation channel, click there, and you will choose the best language you will be able to understand what really is saying in French. Welcome, Jean, and take us through the processes and experiences from Senegal.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci beaucoup de nous donner l'occasion de participer à cet échange-là et puis de le faire aussi en français pour faire travailler les interprètes. Voilà, donc on va partir du contexte du Sénégal, mais globalement, je confirme ce que Esperanza venait de dire. C'est très intéressant parce que en écoutant les autres précédemment, on voit le lien, on voit vraiment une continuité dans la réflexion, que ce soit la première session qui procède du cadrage global avec les objectifs globaux d'adaptation et la deuxième session qui nous amène progressivement vers les aspects locaux. Il y a vraiment des liens et ça permet finalement de voir qu'on parle globalement de la même chose et que c'est finalement très intéressant, très pertinent de questionner cette dialectique, cette relation entre le global et le local en passant par le national et vice-versa, du local au national, dans quelle mesure il interroge un peu ce que nous sommes en train de faire. Et globalement aussi au niveau par rapport aux indicateurs. Donc, je vais, tel que ça m'a été demandé, je vais mettre l'accent sur deux aspects. La place qu'a occupée la question du local, la territorialisation, la problématique du développement local, mais également la production de connaissances locales et les indicateurs qui procèdent de ces connaissances-là et des interventions que mettent en œuvre les différents acteurs. Donc, dans quelle mesure ces aspects, cette dimension locale constitue un espace qui interroge, qui questionne et qui finalement est donc à mettre en dialectique, en réciprocité avec les indicateurs au niveau global. Le premier volet que je vais évoquer, c'est la semaine climat que nous venons d'achever ici au Sénégal du 21 au 25 juillet et qui a été un espace à la fois national, mais aussi avec des acteurs régionaux autant pour moi de l'Afrique. Plus de 10 autant pour moi, 10 nations africaines y ont participé. Au-delà de l'international également hors Afrique. Et ça a permis de pouvoir tous parler du local. Et si vous regardez le thème sur la précédente slide, s'il vous plaît, the previous one, le thème cette année a été une très bonne occasion. Back to the second slide, please. Ça nous a donné l'occasion de parler de la territorialisation en réinventant, en invitant les acteurs à réinventer les territoires, à réinventer la vie, les dynamiques territoriales, ce qui se passe dans les territoires au regard du contexte climatique et dans une perspective d'économie pour les nations africaines. Donc, dans la formulation, on a oublié la partie Afrique. C'est donc la souveraineté économique en Afrique, parce que ça concerne les Africains, les États africains, ce n'est pas seulement le Sénégal. Voilà un peu ce qui était le thème principal de cette année. Réinventons nos territoires. Donc, interrogeons nos processus tels qu'ils finalement prennent corps dans les territoires, parce que c'est de ça qu'il s'agit. Et donc, c'était une très bonne occasion. Je ne vais pas étaler sur tout l'agenda, mais je dirais que le troisième jour, on a on l'a offert comme espace au ministère de l'Environnement pour qu'il puisse justement présenter aux acteurs du Sénégal leur projet, donc porté par le ministère de l'Environnement, sur le Life Art, donc LDC's Initiative for Effective Adaptation and Resilience. Et c'était donc l'entrée en matière de ce projet au Sénégal, et la Semaine Climat a été l'occasion pour eux de parler de ce projet, de le présenter aux Sénégalais et de demander aux différents acteurs de pouvoir contribuer à la performance de ce projet. Donc, vous voyez très clairement que même au niveau institutionnel, il y a cette possibilité de pouvoir parler de l'aspect territoire, aspect développement local, aspect indicateur du développement dans un contexte de changement climatique en parlant tous du local. Et c'est fondamental comme perspective. Et donc, ce projet Life Art, c'est un des volets qui ont été mis en avant dans ce projet. Et next slide, please. Ça a été aussi, au-delà de Life Art, nous avons pu également venir sur le LLA également. Next slide, please. Voilà, et donc en parlant de LLA in Practice, c'était l'occasion, et ça c'est Enda et ses partenaires qui ont également eu à faire cette présentation, d'interroger les leçons apprises des différentes actions, des différentes initiatives que les acteurs mettent en place, y compris nous-mêmes à travers des projets LLA que nous sommes en train de mettre en œuvre. Donc, quelles sont les leçons apprises de cela et qu'est-ce qu'il faut regarder en considérant également les objectifs au niveau global. C'est très important, cet espace-là. Ça a été un bon moment de nous challenger, de poser les vraies questions et derrière aussi voir qu'il ne s'agissait pas seulement de parler de problématiques sur le développement local, mais c'était aussi un moment où un des points qui en est ressorti nous amène à questionner les indicateurs globaux et à nous inviter tous à les domestiquer. Cette appropriation, cette domestication, et je pense que ce matin, que ce soit Ousmane Seydou et les autres, Timo notamment, ont mis l'accent sur cette importance, non pas seulement de réduire le nombre d'indicateurs, mais aussi de les interroger pour que ça puisse effectivement refléter les préoccupations des populations, les préoccupations des communautés, les préoccupations des territoires. Et ça permet finalement cette appropriation des indicateurs au niveau local parce que ça parle le langage local, pas seulement du point de vue linguistique, mais du point de vue traduction de la réalité, traduction des orientations de développement et des priorités de développement des communautés avec le contexte du Sénégal où cette dynamique des communautés se traduit dans le plan de développement communal. C'est le référentiel de chaque collectivité locale du Sénégal. Et donc, tout ce qu'on dit sur les questions climatiques, sur les questions, d'autres questions de développement, doit pouvoir être intégré à la perspective de développement local avec comme unique porte d'entrée le référentiel qui est le plan de développement communal sur 5 ans. Donc, si on est hors contexte, si on est déconnecté du plan de développement communal, c'est comme si on parlait en parallèle, mais on n'est pas dans le processus de développement local. C'est pour cela que cette domestication des indicateurs est extrêmement importante. Je prends peut-être un ou deux exemples. Sur les principes, on a le principe 3 par exemple, qui parle de financement patient et accessible, avec entre autres marqueurs, par exemple, le marqueur qui parle de financement flexible, avec les frais généraux sur le fonctionnement, etc. Et l'indicateur qui parle de financement des transitions disponibles. C'est quoi ces transitions? C'est les transitions qui concernent les populations, qui concernent les communautés. Ce n'est pas forcément les transitions qui se passent au niveau global, où on a une lecture avec des priorités distinctes, précises, mais contextualisées. Ici, on va parler de ce que nous considérons comme transition, nous, acteurs locaux. Et c'est là où c'est très intéressant, justement, de regarder ces indicateurs, y compris aussi la compréhension, le principe 5 qui nous parle de la compréhension des risques climatiques. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire un risque climatique au niveau peut-être du débat international pour un négociateur, pour un décideur? Est-ce que c'est ça la même compréhension du risque climatique? Et c'est intéressant de regarder les indicateurs du GGA, les indicateurs au niveau global, parce qu'au moins pour une fois, on a un indicateur qui parle d'appui à l'interprétation locale de l'information. C'est pas évident, c'est vraiment une innovation, mais il faudra justement donner un contenu assez spécifique sur ça. Je termine juste avec un dernier exemple sur la flexibilité, le principe 6 qui parle de flexibilité et d'apprentissage, par exemple, et sur la simplicité des rapports et outils qui doivent être adaptés. L'indicateur nous parle d'accepter la langue nationale ou la traduction du budget. Et ça, c'est quelque chose de très dynamique, c'est quelque chose de très intéressant et vraiment qui permet finalement de se rendre compte qu'on a une très bonne opportunité de donner la parole aux acteurs locaux et de ressortir avec eux ce qui correspond à leurs préoccupations effectives et ce que signifie l'adaptation menée localement, entre autres. Next, merci. Maintenant, je vais parler du deuxième volet de mon intervention, c'est le centre de ressources. Le premier aspect, c'était pour revenir sur la semaine climat en tant qu'opportunité et cadre de dialogue avec différents acteurs. Il y en avait plus de 400 suivant les jours et plus de 300 en ligne également, et comme je disais, dans différents contextes géographiques. Et voilà. Maintenant, sur le centre de ressources que met en place CDKN au niveau du Sénégal, c'est aussi un espace qui est offert pour rattraper aussi une partie de l'intervention de Esperanza pour montrer qu'on est vraiment tous dans la même dynamique et on cherche les réponses, les outils, les dispositifs qui permettent de pouvoir refléter les préoccupations au niveau des communautés. Ce centre de ressources, il y en a beaucoup. Hein, des centres de ressources au niveau global, au niveau de nos pays, etc. Mais ici, nous avons dit qu'on va travailler à avoir quelque chose qui permet de combler les gaps en matière de dynamique de production et de valorisation de connaissances à l'échelon principalement local. C'est très important cet échelon local parce que c'est une façon finalement de dire, même si les universités, les chercheurs, les techniciens, les experts et autres peuvent contribuer à la production de certains types de connaissances, parce qu'il y en a une variété. On peut avoir une connaissance scientifique, une connaissance endogène, quelqu'un en a parlé sous l'angle culturel, des connaissances pratiques, des savoirs locaux. Il y a plein de types de connaissances, mais d'où que ça vienne, de l'université ou des experts ou des praticiens du développement, la manière dont c'est produit, ça doit être proprement dans le contexte local. Ça doit être en rapport avec les acteurs locaux et même les modes de valorisation et de diffusion de ces connaissances doivent être également adaptés aux acteurs qui l'ont généré. Parce qu'on considère que ça doit être généré à partir des problématiques et des réponses. J'insiste sur le terme réponse locale parce que on part de ces réponses et des solutions locales. Quelqu'un nous disait, nous sommes les premiers ingénieurs du développement. Les autres nous accompagnent. Et c'est en ce moment-là que les réponses doivent être valorisées. Et on a voulu avoir un centre de ressources qui valorise ces réponses et qui les diffuse. Le centre de ressources, techniquement, oui, c'est une plateforme, un site web, mais derrière, on a fait en sorte que la génération des contenus puissent être faites également par les acteurs locaux. Et c'est là où on développe une application qui leur permet aujourd'hui pratiquement plus de 80% des Sénégalais et des Sénégalaises, même en zone rurale, disposent de smartphones et sont sur TikTok, sur autres, etc. Et sont certains capables de les charger ou de demander à leurs enfants de charger du contenu, etc. Pour des raisons économiques, commerciales, notre groupement qui valorise ses produits, etc. Certains sont sur WhatsApp, sur YouTube, etc. Et donc, on a développé une application qui leur permet individuellement et sur la plateforme maintenant en ligne, on a des portes d'entrée avec la connexion. Donc, ça veut dire qu'on peut produire des témoignages. Nous, groupement de femmes de tel village, qui travaillons sur l'agroécologie, on peut dire comment nous avons fait pour régénérer notre sol, pour développer de l'agroécologie, pour pouvoir travailler sous l'angle de la résilience. On peut nous le dire nous-mêmes avec nos propres mots. Et c'est là où c'est absolument essentiel de leur permettre de s'exprimer par eux-mêmes, même si on a un accompagnement des sachants, des universitaires, des ONG, etc. C'est vraiment ça la particularité de ce centre de ressources où le volet plateforme n'est que la partie visible de l'iceberg, mais derrière, c'est la production, elle est faite en tenant compte des premiers producteurs de contenu et de connaissances. C'est vraiment les acteurs locaux. Ils peuvent être éleveurs, ils peuvent être même les autorités locales, des agriculteurs, des pêcheurs, le promoteur touristique local, mais c'est lui et chez lui que les connaissances sont générées. Donc, le centre de ressources, pour venir sur ses objectifs,
Okay, is he still talking?
alors je suis désolé, ça a coupé. Je ne sais pas si c'est bon maintenant, si vous m'entendez maintenant. Donc, je termine juste avec les deux derniers slides pour montrer
Maybe,
les éléments de
as he
contenu.
continues,
Désolé,
maybe
ce
let
n'est
us
pas
also check on time.
en anglais. Donc,
Maybe he should be finalizing. Sorry, Okay, thank you very much, Pascal. I think even from the presentation we have had, what has come out clearly is one, the element of co-creation.
I'm sorry, I don't know if it is in my side, from my side or not. Sorry. Je vous laisse poursuivre. Je ne sais pas à quel moment ça a coupé, donc I'm afraid I give you the floor. Sorry, I don't not.
Thank you very much. Indeed, thank you very much, Pascal. The issue of the voices of local actors, the co-creation, then the learning and reporting has come out clearly, and which, of course, then almost resonates well with what also CDK8 is doing in Kenya in the counties. So, indeed, from the discussion, we can clearly see that there is already work going on at the community level. So there is need for strengthening, then the need for linking what is being done at the community level with the global goal on adaptation. I want to apologize. I think because of time, we shall just maybe take a few minutes of your time to finalize on this, because the discussions are good. We shall maybe just take maybe the next 10 minutes to finalize the entire webinar. So I want to invite the last speaker to give us some reflections from the Mozambique in terms of the lessons, in terms of the context, then how do these shape the national and global processes? Welcome, Luvunga, to give us those insights.
Thank you. My name is Milagro. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. My name is Milagro Luvunga, and I am the co-founder of Mikaya and the executive director of Mikaya Foundation. And I'll just say that this is a Mozambican entity that that has two arms, one being the Mikaya Foundation, which operates as an NGO, but also we have Eco Mikaya Limited, which exists to create market linkages for communities. If we can go to the next slide, please. And so I'm happy that I don't have to repeat most of the things that have been said already about the importance of this work, but I wanted to stress just a few points. The first is this quest for inclusion that has been running through as a thread on all the presentations that preceded me. And so for us also, it starts with people and their relationship with each other and to the environment. And so it is important for us to know when we are, given that we work in local landscapes and in partnership with local communities, it's important for us that we know exactly what we are, who are these partners, and that so looking at aspects of gender, age, culture, demography, geography, environment, etc. So that whatever discussions we have at the local level, they take into account all of these aspects. The next slide, please. And so for those of you who don't know what the shape of Mozambique is, there it is. And on the right-hand side, I have Manica province where our headquarters are. And if you look at the Mozambican map, it's just the lightest color there by Zimbabwe. And so this is the province I'm going to talk about. And next slide, please. And I'm going to be talking about these very different landscapes. This being the Chimanimani, as you can see from the pictures in the middle, it's a lush environment, and which has on its so the left and right hand side, you have the Chimanimani National Park and the highest point of Mozambique as well, Mount Binga. On the next slide, you will see that we also have in the same province a very different type of environment. And so in one small space of Mozambique, where we work, we have all of this variation. And the next slide. And so what I wanted to stress here is the fact that even just going to the specific case study of the work that we do with communities around the buffer zone of the Chimanimani National Park, for us, if we look at this, just at this small, not so small area, we can see big variation. The highlands in the north, the lowlands in the south, difference in terms of cultures and tradition, although it's all patriarchal. In the north, women have more agency, and in the south, it's they do not have that agency, and are totally working under their male counterparts. And so those small, just those differences can have a big impact on adaptation strategies for different communities, given that and given the low levels of investment for development that we have in this area, and also the fact that most men then go to neighboring countries to work. The women who are there, most of whom do not directly own the land, that has an impact on how these adaptation strategies can pan out. On the next slide, so I just wanted to say that for us then to be able to work in any environment, it's important for us to know the population, who is there, how many people, where they are. The socioeconomic and environmental information is also critical for us to be able to work together and plan together. And also even to facilitate how communities can use this data to then plan their own development. And what we have done in Shimani-Mani, still on the previous slide, what we have done in Shimani-Mani is registering all of this data, really georeferencing each household, delimiting communities, delimiting household land and fields, so that the communities themselves have this data at their disposal, which is not only in terms of physical maps, but also being hosted on a database that, although it is privately managed, it's linked to a national database. And the most important thing being that these communities can, they do have people trained at the local level who can have access to this database, so that they can monitor that in monitoring change in their land, they can upload such changes in the database and therefore have updated systems to be able to make their plan, their growth plan. Also, but the points I wanted to put forward for discussion here is it's really, when we look into the national databases that we have, it's important for us to consider, where are these databases hosted? Who really manages those databases, and for how long? Who has access to them? How accessible are our national, regional, or global databases to the people in the field who need to really live with and plan and live and make life worthwhile and for themselves, and reducing the impact of climate. And so we work a lot on these processes, on how communities can actually not just collect data for themselves once the systems have been developed, but also how can they be part of the management of such of changes in land use where they are. But one question that an issue that I also wanted to put here: many databases in our countries are funded by donor money, and when we come to situations such as the ones we are living today, where platforms that are public, managed by governments, or platforms that are private, they then lack funding, and they are no longer accessible to those who need them to be able to develop their adaptation plans. When that happens, then how can countries use this or have access to this data and be able to participate more actively in processes such as the ones we are discussing here? Next slide, please. And so for us, I just wanted to state, just to show a few pictures of the kind of work that happens at local level. All the consultations and joint work and on the planning work, also how bringing information, be it from Senegal or from Kenya, from elsewhere, for communities to look at what experiences exist from other communities that live in similar circumstances, can how exposure to that can help them make their own decision and maximize their decisions to be able to improve their own lives and resilience. Next slide, please. And so this is these are some of the ways they decide to embrace and manage their land and resources. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, sorry, if I can just go to the one before. What I wanted to show here really is the importance of the importance of ensuring that every single group within the community is heard. For instance, in planning, in mapping at the local level, the maps that are made within the same community, by men or by women are totally different, because different groups within communities, they value different resources and they map them differently as well. And then at the end, we bring in the maps from young men and young men, young women, older men, and other groups, so that a general map can be produced of the community, reflecting all the issues and interests of everybody involved. But also, what we do as Mikaya then is to take all of these concerns that can come up from these communities, using the data they also collected. We use this so that we can make inferences into policy on the policy arena, ensuring that whatever policies and legislation that comes up that has to do with land and natural resources or other planning processes do take into account these sensitivities or all the sensitivities that come up from these processes. And so what I also wanted us to consider as we talk about databases at the local level or databases at the national level, and then what happens globally, as we are talking about Africa and its ability to be able to really be heard or having all these aspects considered, I would like to also to really concentrate on what kind of platforms could where could we really house, what safe spaces could we have, not just nationally but also regionally and continentally, where even if let's say, for example, if Mozambique loses access to critical database, Mozambicans can still have access to that information and be able to plan using their data, which might still be available regionally, let's say for Mozambique in SADC or elsewhere. If we within Africa find different ways of not just gathering but housing this data, so different countries, irrespective of where they find themselves in their development process, can have access to them, so that their voices are not just forgotten. I'll stop there because almost everything else has been said in this meeting by previous speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That is the Mozambique perspective. Thank you very much, Nuvanga, from Mikaya. Indeed, from the discussions, from the case studies, challenges and opportunities, we have found that these aspects are cross-cutting when it comes to what the different organizations are doing and what can also be able to feed into the GGA. We have identified the issues of contextualizing these particular indicators, the issue of data, which is very critical, even into what the CDKN are developing, the MAL platform, what ARIN is developing, the Llama dashboard. All this, then it is critical that data is important, because once we have data, we can be able to visualize, we can be able to analyze really what is happening on the local perspectives, and then contribute to what is being discussed globally. Indeed, the discussions have been very fruitful, have been very engaging, and also hearing from the experts themselves on what they are doing. Also, this has shown that indeed a lot is being done, but of course then there is need also to involve the communities to develop the local indicators, which is also very critical. At this juncture, I know most of the questions we have been asked in the chat box, and the experts also have tried to address them, and we do believe that even after this particular webinar, we shall ensure that all these presentations plus the recording is shared with everyone, so that this discussion will still go on. We have shared our social media platforms. We shall continue engaging into these discussions to ensure that we concretize our, of course, our aspirations. We concretize also our aspects so that during the COP30, then we can be able to present the real challenges that can feed into the discussions that will be going on in the COP30 in Brazil. So at this juncture now, I want to invite Florence to take us through the media now screenshot. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Humphrey, for that insightful and seamless moderation. But before we even do the media process, allow me to make an important upcoming event that I believe will be of great interest to many of us here. And that is about the conference that we are holding in October. From 21st to 24th October this year, the Africa Research and Impact Network, together with the Ministry of Health, that is the Ministry of Health Kenya, the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, also for the Kenyan government, the Africa CDC, the African Network for Collaboration and Engagement on Health and Climate, that is the CHANCE Network, the Kenya Medical Research Institute, that is KEMRI, the National Environment Management Authority, that is NEMA Kenya, AMREF Health Africa, together with other partners that we are still expecting, will host the Pan-African Conference on Environment, Climate Change and Health, from Science to Policy. That is the title of that conference. Now, this high-level gathering will invite researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and development partners from across Africa and beyond, just to address the continent's interconnected environmental, health, and climate challenges. We are currently accepting abstracts, and your abstract should just be about 300 words, summarizing your methodology, findings, and policy relevance. And that is across the 9 thematic tracks from ranging from infectious diseases to climate innovations. Now, the deadline for the abstract submission is 10th. That is just 2 days away. So we encourage you to put in your abstracts. It's very important because it will help in addressing some of the challenges that we have in the continent. The registration is also on. My colleague will share that link. Kindly register. It will be very nice to see you here in Nairobi, because this is an opportunity that will enable you to share your work and of course influence policy and Africa's sustainable future. So I really emphasize that you should register for this conference. If you're a scientist, kindly submit your work so that it can have an impact in the continent. So now I welcome you to open your cameras. Those who are able to open their cameras, kindly open your cameras so that we can take a screenshot of the participants. Thank you very much. This is done, and I look forward to seeing you during our next webinar. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dr. Humphrey.
Yeah, thank you very much, Florence, and thank you very much, everyone. And I think that is the end of our webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and have a good evening or good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.